It's no secret to anyone that during World War II, the US Navy had a bit of a carrier shortage. At first, that is. We all know how massive their fleet became by the end of the conflict. A combination of shipbuilding efforts and combat minimization in 1943 led to the US having the biggest carrier fleet in the world by August 1945. However, looking back to the early days of the war in 1942, the situation becomes a lot more dire for the US Navy. The United States started the war with a grand total of 7 aircraft carriers in service, 2 of which, the Wasp and the Ranger, were deemed unfit for service in the Pacific, at first at least. Over the course of 1942, the Japanese Navy did the best they could to minimize this carrier fleet even further. At the start of the Pacific War, the Japanese Navy arguably had the best carrier fleet in the world, and they put it to good use. By the time the Guadalcanal campaign had ended in early 1943, the US and Japanese carrier fleets had basically fought each other into ruin. The US was left with the damaged and worn-out carrier Enterprise holding the line all by herself, whilst the Japanese, although having more operational ships, were struggling to get enough aircraft operational to man their flat tops. At this point, the situation for the US was looking rather desperate, and in order to get as many new carriers into service as possible, some rather interesting ideas were proposed. The swarm of Essex-class carriers was not expected to enter service until late 1943, and in the interim, the US needed a stopgap measure. A few ideas were at first tossed around. Multiple Cleveland-class cruisers were quickly slated to be converted into light aircraft carriers, eventually becoming the Independence class. And the US even sent lines out to their ally Great Britain, asking if they could loan them a carrier. Both of these plans eventually ended up succeeding to some extent, but the US still wanted more. The idea of converting Cleveland-class hulls had gone over relatively well, and soon enough the US started looking to other hulls that they had laying around, namely those of the Iowa class. Although designed as massive battleships, the Iowas were designed with a top speed of around 33 knots, equal to that of a large aircraft carrier, and as such were uniquely suited to being converted. The first 4 ships, Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri, and Wisconsin, were already too far along into construction as battleships to be converted to carriers, and as a result, the only real options for conversion were the last 2 ships, Kentucky and Illinois, neither of which had even been launched yet. The plan for converting the ships was relatively simple. The planned design of the Essex class was sorta just smashed together with the Iowa hull form to create a design as quickly as possible. The result was a carrier of dubious utility. Converting service ships to aircraft carriers was never an easy task, and this was no exception. The problems were only exacerbated by the fact that the design had been drafted in less than half a month. The design could really only plausibly carry around 85 aircraft all told, and considering the time it would take to convert the ships, it just wasn't worth it.